Alright, there we go. Alright, welcome back to Woke Wednesdays. Like I said, we do this every single Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm so excited because today we have someone who I admire very much, amazing, brilliant young man, professor, mentor, phenomenal person. Would you like to introduce yourself? That's a lot.
Phenomenal
right?
person, mentor. My name is Ben Baez. I am a professor of higher education at Florida International University.
Yeah,
and I am Hurston's major advisor.
Yes.
In the PhD program.
Sometimes I mentor him. I mentor you sometimes. But recently he's been mentoring me a little bit more. I'm taking a step back in my mentoring career. So my brother's on. He was asking about the PhD and JD. So you have two degrees, two doctorates.
I got my JD first. In fact, when I got my JD, that was the only thing that I had heard about PhDs, but I wanted a JD. I wanted to be a lawyer, and it didn't pan out as a moral thing for me, and so because of the job that I had, it got me thinking about the PhD, and so I decided to do that. But yes, I started off as a JD at Syracuse University, and then I got a job at Syracuse doing judicial affairs stuff, and then through that I learned about, we had a lot of GAs who were in the higher education program there, and so I got to be interested in being a professor. And not a professor of law, but a professor of education. So I entered the doctorate program there. I quit my job, entered the doctorate program, and then got a PhD, and then became a professor.
So where are you from?
Originally?
Yeah.
I was born in Santurce, Puerto Rico, and I came to the U.S. I still see Puerto Rico as, it's part of the U.S. I just want to make sure for those conservatives out there, it's still part of the U.S., motherfuckers. But I meant that it's, I still feel like I came to a different country. So my mother brought us to the mainland of the United States when I was 7, and just entering 2nd grade. So I grew up in New York almost all my life.
You're getting all the hearts, Dr. Baez, and we just started the show. Y'all...
I'm getting all the what?
All the hearts. So people are giving you hearts.
I don't know what that means.
You're just getting hearts. That means they like you.
Oh.
Yeah.
Hey, yo.
Alright, so your mom, she brought y'all to New York.
Yes. Me and my 3 brothers.
And then you grew up in the Bronx, in New York.
Correct.
Right.
And then we had moved to Brooklyn a little bit, and then Bronx. And then when I got old enough to leave home, I got an apartment with some other friends that we lived in Manhattan, and then I went to Syracuse University for my JD, my Juris Doctor, my law degree.
So here's a question, and tonight's topic is race, racial identities, and we're going to get into this, but it's not often that we see poor children end up getting a JD and a PhD. So what kind of happened that kind of led you there? Was there like one thing that or a person that maybe encouraged you to get there?
And a lot of help. You know, there's always the school system is, especially when they're working with poor kids and low-income kids and minoritized kids, because kids are minoritized, they're not actually minorities, that they become, the teachers expect a certain thing to happen, a certain kid to behave in a certain way, and then they behave in a way that will ensure that kid behaves that way. But the kid that seems to match what they imagine in themselves, like the kids that bookish or reader. I was always a reader. I love reading.
Students.
The ones that reproduce the system effectively. Those are the ones that get singled out and taken out of classes, and then that's when you realize that there are track classes, even though they're not really called that. And then told to take a test so you can test out. So I tested out of my high school. And I went to another high school. So I think it matters that a kid who is, for me, like a reader in a culture where you're not supposed to do that, and most people then don't do it, or don't read the things that teachers care you should be reading. That kid is given a battery of support that. And there is it's not to say that there is no you still have to take those opportunities, right? So you still have to be able to take them, but that some kids are never given the opportunities because they don't have the kind of person who's willing to, because it's extra work for them, right? Because if they come in thinking that if you're in a low income, like the schools in the South Bronx, the teachers come in, they do what they're doing, anything they do different to help a kid is extra work for them. And so when not all teachers want to do it, so some kids just, so I happen to be, I was able to effectively do the things that mattered in schools, and I was lucky, and just so that's, I don't know how else to explain it.
Yeah. I think you
But
said it well.
I was never athletic, despite my buff appearance. I was never really athletic. I didn't like it. I don't like sweat. So I found that, and I'm in this apartment where
We don't have to. So the first thing Dr. Baez said, we walked in and he said, "Why doesn't the door close after me? Just rob me, why don't you?" I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm poor." Like, oh, the viewers are asking, "Where's your wine?"
how do they know I have wine?
Because they can see this. And by the viewers, I mean Almi.
Almi, didn't you have me for 2.5 hours already? By the way, viewers, for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm teaching a class on class, gender, and race. And so Herson is in the class, and Almi is in the class as well, and she's asking about my wine because we have that connection. We both like it a lot. And I've seen Almi, so
Mario's laughing about what you said. I was never athletic. I don't like sweats.
yeah, I mean, I think
it.
it's possible perhaps to be an athlete and not sweat, but I just didn't see how that in my mind. I couldn't conceptualize it. And also, I'm 5'4". I've always been thin and frail. I was on a diet when I was a kid to get fat.
Were you ever in a fight when you were a kid?
Yes.
Were you? Can you tell us about that fight?
Yes.
How many fights? All the time?
One physical altercation.
So one physical altercation.
Not
Okay.
not counting my mother, who was a physical discipliner. But my only physical fight in school was I was in 5th grade, and I had said, "This is so stupid," but I'll just tell you how stupid I am. So this I had said that my friend's mother was not a virgin.
So you
and
told
I
a
meant
kid,
my friend,
your mother's not a virgin.
he's one of 5, and I said, "Your mother's not a virgin." I meant that as an insult, because but in Latin culture you don't mess with mothers, right? So he pushed me to the ground really hard. I fell and I started to cry, and that was my physical.
You dropped your books.
So that was that was the only physical fight I've ever been in.
Mario's
I say that I won because I cried, and you don't hit a crying kid. So I won.
So he won. So Doctor said, yeah. So just be careful. Dr. Baez has all of your mama jokes. They're laughing. So tonight we're talking about race. Race and racism seem to be words that are often thrown around. Everyone knows what they mean, but then at the same time, because everyone has their own definition, it gets really complicated, really, really complex. People have their kind of practical and lived experiences around race and racism. But tonight we want to kind of see how you've published a lot of work around affirmative action, race, thought. So how when you approach this topic, which is really difficult, first I would ask you kind of a personal question. When did you, or have you ever seen yourself as a racialized being? Have you ever felt...
For sure when I'm asked. Now.
Like right now.
Oh, okay, I'm racial. Well, yes, because as someone who's very... I'm Puerto Rican. I'm dark skin. So I'm always sort of self-conscious about it, because I'm in a society where I'm supposed to know that about myself, right? And when you're in the sort of dominant position, you don't have to think of yourself as having a skin color that would matter in a context, right? So as a person who is also in a world of a certain, I'm more likely to be in a world with other white people or people who don't necessarily have to always think of themselves in racial terms, that I'm always very conscious about it. And so, but I'm also, I don't always feel like that's, to be racialized is to be discriminated against. So there's two things we want to distinguish. And when you said that most people know race and racism as a subject, most people know racism, have some kind of race, but most people don't know what we mean by when we talk about race and
real quick,
racialized.
Y'all, if y'all have any questions, please pose them in the comment section. And rarely does the host get corrected. I don't know if I told you that, but I guess
what am I to do with this information?
I mean, I guess we can continue. Right, go ahead.
Okay, so I will take it into consideration that you don't like to be questioned, and therefore, I now know when I'm doing it, it's going to hurt your feelings. Whatever I was saying was important, and so one of the
most people don't know what race is.
Well, yes, and we can talk about that. But in terms of there are contexts in which I'm always sort of and in the back of my mind, because I study this stuff and I think about this stuff a lot, I know that it's always there, sort of hovering there as always potentially of use, either by me or by somebody else. Sometimes I'm in a situation where it's not really explicit, but it's sort of in the air, and then you're feeling like a little bit, like it's like a perpetual low-grade fever that you can still function, but you're feeling like, what's going on here? Is it this? Is it me? And then but there are times when when I see myself in very racialized term, or Puerto Rican, I'm in a particular situation where it's made to make me feel safe. It's very salient situation. So I'm usually in a room full of whites. Then I start to think of myself much more in terms of my color of my skin, or my ethnicity and my accent. And if I'm in a room full of, say, non-whites, it depends on who the non-whites are. Then I start to feel more or less like it doesn't matter, unless then the class issue. So then I start to think more about that. And so I guess there are situations in which the context makes the issue more salient than other times. And sometimes at home, I don't always think of like, God, I'm a Puerto Rican, I'm just kind of like, where's the wine, where's the dog, where the hell did you put my socks, that kind of stuff. So I don't always think that that's a racial thing. But I do think that I work in a world in which most of the people I'm interacting with, even though they're intellectuals or are credentialed to be, that it's really remarkable how often at times that we have to sort of explain things. But racism is a concept where people feel that that means that you have a prejudice, or you believe that some group is more inferior than another, and so that
it is believed to be that, or that's what
I think that's what racism is that you feel you believe, and I mean
a person
or groups believe that some groups or some person is inferior to them because of a racial category or perceived one. And so
So do you differentiate between like a systematic or institutional type of racism,
yes, of course,
and an interpersonal? So maybe there are two types?
There's a lot of types.
A lot of types?
There's a lot of types of actions and practices and beliefs that are premised on the notion of inferiority of a race, or one race over another, which I call racism. But race is the way that we categorize the world according to racial terms. Some of this is good and empowering and liberatory and can create wonderful political subjects, like the way about the Dreamers and the way that's a racialized category in order to create a political identity. But it's also used negatively to group people into certain things. So racialized ideas can lead to racism. And so I believe that race is a structuring concept in the world. It structures the world according to racial terms. Racism is the acting upon a prejudice that somebody's more inferior to another. That's how I understand this. There may be other people have found convincing ways of defining this. And in the class that I'm teaching, we're going to sort through all these definitions, as many as we can think of. But the point is that I do see a distinction between race and racism. And I believe that racism led to race. That the idea of when the colonizers went into the world and noticed that there were people that they wanted to exploit and dominate, and they saw that they were different, and they thought that difference was made them savages or whatever, that they then created race as a concept to categorize the world, so that the world can think of itself that way, so they can be administered in whatever such a way.
So I remember
that's my thing. We got into too intellectual.
No. And if y'all have any questions, if something was a little too abstract or complicated, please feel free to ask for clarification, and we'll go into that. So I remember the first time that I sat in an office with you, you asked me.
This is after you hated me?
This is after I hated. Well, I think I was getting over the hatred. But you asked, "Oh, what are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm trying to do some work around race." You said, "Okay, what came first, racism, race, or slavery?"
Because I was talking about this in class, so if you should test them, sometimes it tests some ideas.
So you were asking, can I more one? Please. But you were asking me what came first, and I didn't really know how to respond to that.
You notice that "Can I have some more wine?" is a very ambiguous, like more mean.
Yeah. Well, I just you were closer to it. So
is it good?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you. And if y'all are drinking wine, cheers to you tonight.
Even if you're not.
Even if you're not, cheers to you. But yeah, so I didn't really know how to respond with that, and even though I had been reading a lot about it, I didn't really know how to even address such a question. So for you, the way you understand it, racism led to race, which then led to slavery?
No.
Or
I believe there was slavery first.
Within a U.S. context.
And not all slavery was racial terms. We can think about the notion of women being enslaved, and racism existed based on a whole range of things. Maybe
economics,
birth, or like if you were not aristocratic, like if you were not of royalty, then everybody else was always potentially and inevitably or could be a slave. So there was slavery before the colonizers, the Europeans, went out in the world with their guns and then were able to use categories associated with skin color and phenotypes and all that. So I believe there was slavery first, and that we still have forms of slavery that are not entirely or not easily reducible to race. And then we have, but then came racism, like the belief that people were inferior and could be dominated and killed and exterminated and enslaved, for that reason. So that a monarch who might have been in Africa might have been a monarch and a highly respected person of high level of respect and high level of prestige. For the Europeans, that was just another black person. So that became, so racism led to the need in order to keep dominating, you needed a concept that had to appear natural, you had to invent categories around race that had a scientificity to them, in order to keep perpetuating the notion of difference. And because you have to first have the concept of difference before that difference can be put into hierarchies. And so that's my theory. That's from my readings. That's how I understand things. The important things is not this history about what came first, but the idea of separating out the idea of race. We can have now race without necessarily having to be racist. And so, because now we're in the, like to study, for example, how African Americans are facing the world of higher education, we can study that and so have it be about race, but not have it be racist. And so I don't, not acting on a prejudice in a discriminatory way, not having prejudicial beliefs. So I do distinguish those concepts. And now race is bigger than racism. And
what do you mean by that?
It's a larger structure and category than racism. There's it works in the world without necessarily relying on prejudice. And
so I had been reading a bunch of stuff. So Woke Wednesdays Woke Wednesdays anniversary, a year anniversary, will actually be on the 25th, which I believe is tomorrow. So next week we'll be live on South Beach filming Woke Wednesdays episode. Feel free to come out. It's free.
Wednesday Festival?
No, not there.
sorry, that's my class.
But I was so the first episode I did was about race and racism.
Really,
and
you?
Yes, me.
Oh,
no, I know.
That's a new topic.
I know that's a topic in itself.
Because usually like talking about Greek stuff.
Oh my god.
No experience.
But my first episode, I talked about race and racism. I thought I knew something. I had been reading a lot of Eduardo Bonilla Silva, Puerto Rican sociologist out of Duke University.
A good one, a very good one.
And he makes an argument that people of color cannot be racist. And so I remember saying this on the show, and someone told me, they gave me like a really hard example, And I was like, I don't know how to respond to that.
I mean, like,
I'll get back to you.
Um,
Something like that. And so, what are your beliefs around? And we do have a question from one of the viewers, and I'm gonna ask it in a bit. So, what do you think about this idea that people of color,
again, the way
they cannot be racist people?
well, yeah, you can have belief that some people are inferior. So it's amazing to me, say, how often American minoritized groups feel about minoritized groups in other nations or from other countries, and some of the ways that, say, some African American students might be looking at immigrants. I find could be prejudicial, could be discriminatory. So there's two things about. I believe anybody can be racist. I don't believe that everybody has the social power to enact on that racism, to enact the practices around that racism. So I believe that there may be people who are racist, but who believe that some races are inferior to the others, who cannot enact that belief into practice. They don't have the social or organizational power to do so. So, but I believe anybody can be prejudicial, believe that some groups are inferior to others. I don't believe that everybody can be discriminatory. Only those people with power and money and organizational can take that racism, that prejudice, and put it into practice in a way that discriminates and that takes away a benefit, or that doesn't give out benefits. So if you have the power to hand out jobs and you are racist, your racism has more effect than the Chris Rock. I don't know if you have a narrative about the most racist person in the world is the old black guy. Who can't enact that prejudice into practice. He doesn't have the organizational power to do so. But also, we've seen that the more that minoritized faculty people become successful organizationally and economically, the more conservative they get, and the more prejudicial they get. And so, yeah.
Do you think that's an example? We see that kind of with like white Cubans in Miami. Do you think that would be an example of how they've attained a certain type of power, political power at least, and how we do see a lot of kind of racist rhetoric, actions, I guess, working through there?
Sure. Sure, and Cuba is a good example of one of the massive slave plantations and Africans brought to the so-called New World. For the Europeans, it was new. For the New World, went to Cuba to extract labor for the sugar industry, and so that was very racialized. And society they may not have the language for thinking about racial terms the way the U.S. does. The U.S. has a very sophisticated use of labels and technologies and instruments for thinking about race and practicing it, but it's definitely racialized. Who has power, who doesn't have power, who has economic wealth, who doesn't have economic wealth, and it's definitely along racial lines because it had to be. And so yes, it's possible. So the whiter you are skin color wise, the more likely you can benefit from racialized institutions and practices and all that. The more prejudicial you can be. So again, I think the term prejudice and the term racism, to me, gets in the way of understanding how complex social structures are. So that, because everybody, when you hear the word racism, is like, oh, the Ku Klux Klan. And I think because that's how we've been socialized to think that it's all like this individual phenomenon. It's the racist that does bad things. It's not, there's no. So most people don't really understand the notion of institutionalized practices that create differential effects on people of different racial categories, and so it's hard for people to understand. I think this kind of overemphasis on racism because it's not fully. We haven't fully unpacked what it really means. Can get in the way oftentimes to talk about these things. So just have to know that and work with that. It's still a good concept. It explains many, many important things. So it's not to get rid of it, but it's just to understand that for sometimes that conversation is meaning something other than to a group who are not used to thinking of anything but prejudice. To talk about institutionalized racism begins to feel like that doesn't make any sense.
So Mario's saying that you need to be on every episode every week, apparently.
Tell Mario that I have something called a life. It's not a good one, but it is a different one, and so.
I don't have one, so I'm here.
You said there was
every
a question?
Yeah, we have a question. Utter Killer is asking, would you say race was sort of constructed as propaganda?
Yes. Actually, propaganda could be a very good use of the word. Except that at some point, it becomes truth because it just keeps perpetuating itself, so that you racialize people and then you create institutions that create hierarchies. Those hierarchies become realities that begin to behave the way that the hierarchy is supposed to work. And all of a sudden, it's less about propaganda to talk about deprivations and all that. It becomes more like truth. So that what started off as a propaganda to get people to believe that these things were natural, at some point become truths. So it's interesting to find out at what point propaganda becomes science and truth, right? And so,
yeah,
good question.
No, yeah, absolutely. So I know when we first met, you used to tell me, "Oh, Hurston, you're so one note. You're so one note. All you do, not everything is race. The couch. Stop saying the couch is racist. Not everything is racist. And
not the way that you meant it.
Yeah, not the way that I meant it. But I see a lot, especially on social media. We kind of relegate things to this. This has to be racism. This has to be sexism. This has to be this ism. We don't, from what I'm seeing, we don't often think about it in maybe intersectional ways or in the overlap of identities. So what do you think then? What happens when we relegate something to an ism, that it can only be this or it has to be this? What do you think about that? Can that be maybe a good thing politically to try to enact some change, or I don't know?
It could be, yeah. Sometimes it should be done. So, okay, the assertion of truths, claims about truths. I am asserting an ism as this is the truth of the way the world is at the moment that we're talking about it. And if that is done as a way of closing off understandings, because part of the ways, I don't want to get too technical, but there's this thing called structure. I'm not going to get into the structure of feeling, but there's this thing about that we tend to always want to create a definitive label and once and for all truth, right? To the living present that is moving, changing, it's being lived, so that when we say this is the ism, or explains it, we essentially have it's now part of the past, right? The present is now foreclosed to us. So what's going on is being lived. How categories are being changed and exploded and contested and all that begins to get lost when you start to use definitive, all-encompassing, foundational claims, right? But there may be explicit political purposes why we want to do certain things, why we want to make certain assertions. So I would argue that with that political intention, hopefully with the motive of fixing, because you've seen how it's done the other way, like colorblindness is thrown as a way of entrenching further racial inequalities, and that's done intentionally, I believe strongly, that you want to be very careful about understanding that to be provisional, because any attempt at building a truth matter creates a reality that rather than be confirmed wants to be produced. And so, because again, these truth claims wind up having effects on the world and creation of, for example, when you create the at-risk child, that is now you've created a category that winds up coming back at you that confirms the category. So one of the things you want to be careful in creating these definitive statements is that they do have effects on the world, and they wind up creating social realities that are hard to then undo. So, and this is tricky business. So it's not like, okay, when do you end? You have political projects, and if you're always on the move, one of the things about the U.S. is a good thing in terms of race is that so many people are concerned about it that they have created such sophisticated thoughts on it that it's really easy to explain a lot of phenomenon. And the racism discourse is always on the move. So we have Bonilla, we talked about Bonilla before, or other really wonderful who are constantly giving us really more sophistication, more thoughts, more nuances. Yeah. Because I believe that's the world is full of nuances, and people are never really the abstractions that we imagine for them. So that's a good thing. The problem is that they can become entrenched, and they can foreclose the present from happening, from being able to understand that. So if you say this is the ism, we moved on, right? No, we no longer need to. No, the present is moving. It's moving. The racial categories right now are going through remarkable reworkings and new workings, and the gender ones are also going through all kinds of new things, right? And so that's so from we have to pose certain hypotheses, but we also have to know that it's living, it's moving, it's never going to be captured. Social, as we interact more with each other, we get more and more complex, and we're on the move. And the movement may not be good, may be bad, but it's moving, and we want to be careful to just not have definitive statements.
So Emmanuel is saying very true. Categories make us stuck in our thinking, and I do have a question about that. So there was this Republican congressman out of Arizona. Feel free to.
There was. They still are.
Still there. Yes. Sorry. So sorry. Yeah, no, you're fine. So he's still there. He's a man. He's from El Salvador, and he was on CNN talking about. He's an immigrant himself. Came here to the United States, and he was saying, "Well, why can't these immigrants just do it the right way? I did it." And I had such a, I think, visceral reaction. My sister sent me this link on YouTube, and I had this very visceral reaction. And I was so angry at seeing that a Latino man, right, specifically from Central America, right next door to Nicaragua, had these thoughts about people who I consider my people, and I was just so angry at it. And I was saying, how can this Latino man have these thoughts as an immigrant?
Or Marco Rubio in Florida.
Marco Rubio in Florida.
They made it.
But it was a way of me policing this identity. I had expectations out of this ethnic or racial, however we want to say it, identity. I expected this out of this person for one particular reason, the fact that they were of this ethnicity. How do you, in a way, that's what I did. It's not a good thing. Maybe I don't know how to. But we do. I see this happen with so many of my friends, people who I talk to, that because of their racial identity or ethnic identity, we expect certain things from them.
Well, clearly the racial identity of that person appears not to be a racial identity. It's a racial category. I mean, he's Latino from El Salvador, so that's the only thing we can say about him. But identity implies commitments, right? Psyches. Subjectivities.
So you said someone can be of a racial category, but not of a racial identity.
Yeah, Clarence Thomas is a black African American male as a category. He is of African descent. He's dark skinned. He's Clarence Thomas. Can't be said to have a sense of black identity.
He's a Supreme Court justice. In case I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a Supreme Court justice. With people like him, really, we don't need one. We don't need ones. Anyway, so the point is,
but he said he doesn't fit the racial identity.
He doesn't. What is his identity?
Can you break that down a little bit?
He doesn't have a sense of himself as black, and have that mean a commitment to certain values, a commitment to certain histories.
Who was the lady was working for Trump? Omarosa.
Ooh.
Right. So there was.
But she's cray. She's crazy.
I don't think people say cray anymore, but.
I am not as young as Hurston. I had to understand.
You're younger.
I had to learn what the word woke was. Wednesdays I knew. But she's fucking nuts.
So I don't know if you saw
That's a clinical term.
the fucking nuts. Oh, you saw the morning show? There's this woman on the show. She's like, "Bye, Felicia."
Robin Roberts, yeah.
Yeah. So there was this kind of, it was a policing of identity in a way. This other, I forgot what her name is.
Okay, so Robin Williams was not policing Omarosa's identity. She was policing Omarosa's sincerity. And
okay.
Omarosa was putting herself as a black woman, who's got a story to tell, and that's what Robin Roberts was responding to. So she wasn't. And Robin Roberts is one of the more classier, which means most non-political persons on TV. In fact, she is the kind of person you want on TV: neutral, non-threatening, not too dark, that kind of person. So perfect. White people love her. So when she said that, Omarosa is taking something. Omarosa has gone over a certain line that even Robin Williams has to. Robin Roberts, Williams. Yeah, there was a Robin Williams. I'm not sure which one was the woman on the TV. Robin Williams or Robin Roberts, one of them, the woman. I'm assuming. Cisgendered, I'm assuming.
I'm sorry.
I'm so keeping on track. So anyway, so I was understanding where Morris says, I got a story to tell, and I'm a black man, and bye Felicia.
So yes. So, but one thing it's so I had never thought about that until now. How someone can fit a racial category, but not an identity. You're saying identity takes commitments to something.
Yes, to have a racial identity is to understand yourself politically, culturally, historically. That may be the most important. Historically, as having certain beliefs and commitments and values. I don't believe that identities are psychological phenomena. I try to avoid psychology as much as I can, because psychology hasn't been a friend of society. But
I remember one time we were having drinks at a professor's house, and we were talking about something, and a psychologist walked in, and you asked him, "Oh, what do you do?" Psychology, and you're like, "Okay, I think we can leave now."
That was me being an asshole, because I shouldn't do that at somebody's house. Do they have alcohol?
They did have it. It was Dr. Wynn, Johnny Wynn.
Okay. Yeah, I have a different narrative about this, but I don't want to get into that because it doesn't make me look good either. I have a good narrative for you. I'm not going to come out looking good at any of these narratives. Anyway, the point is that my son is a psychology major, and so we have these conversations about what he can assume with a knowledge of someone's inner. There's no more powerful knowledge than to claim you know somebody's inner workings, because that's a very powerful tool to use, right?
Professor X, yeah. X-Men, Professor X. Yeah, watch X-Men. Do you watch X-Men?
No.
X-Men, no? Okay.
I don't watch TV.
One of our viewers said, no offense to psych majors.
No offense to psych majors.
No offense to psych majors.
Some of my friends are psych majors.
Some.
I have one psych major friend.
This one. So here's the question.
And my son is a psychology major, and they're wonderful psychology. Psychology is going through another iterations of, so it's becoming more about how these things are narratives.
Nicholas Rose, isn't he a psychologist?
Yeah. So there's some really wonderful work being done in psychology. I'm talking about the psychology that tries to create where you to understand the inner workings of people so they can be used. And so much of for example, much of standardized testing comes out of psychometrics that comes out of psychology. So we want to be careful about psychology as a field, as if it was saying something more important than the sociological, historical phenomenon in the world. It may be saying something important, but it's in relation to and for me, it's in relation to what's going on in the social conditions of the time.
So let me ask you a question.
That's what I meant.
Can a person, in your opinion, And I wanted to talk about a little bit more about what Dr. Bias has published, because I think his earlier work was more around race, but recently he's been getting into some more maybe philosophical type
It was
stuff
that too, but yeah.
But I want to get into that. But real quick, do you think a person can be then in a racial category as white, and then a racial identity as something else?
Yeah,
or vice versa.
I suppose, because I don't know that if I understand identities, especially these politicized identities around commitments and values, and not necessarily racial categories, then yes, I believe. Joni Wynn is. You mentioned Joni Wynn.
One of my old professors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe she is, for all intents and purposes, has a really significant sense of being black, of black identity, like committing to racial justice. Has worked in HBCUs for much of her life. So she understands way more than Clarence Thomas. But the point is that if and this is not an uncontroversial claim, so I state that up front. I know this is controversial and it's not necessarily, but inclination wise, I feel like if you have values, share certain values, are committed to certain kinds of things, then you can. And ultimately, the term identity, we don't even need it if we're talking about these other things, right? So shared commitments and values and a certain sense of history. So let's call it identity. Let's not call it identity. Does it matter ultimately if it builds alliances that are necessary to have?
But we live in a world that you're talking a little bit about structures of feelings, how we feel a need to label things.
To definitively label, to define it for once and for all, and therefore relegate it to the past. When in fact it's moving, it's some things can't be fixed. Some things are in motion right now. I don't know that there's a way that we can talk about gender identities and the way they're changing. That's the point. There's no way to definitively say anything about it now. Some things are unclassifiable right now, and so we don't need to. There's not to say that you don't use existing categories of thought and value to help us put a hypothesis so we can move forward, but it's to say that they shouldn't be understood as they should be still understood as being in the present, being lived. And so, yeah.
Other Kayla saying, and I don't know if I'm understanding this correctly, that where you'll have a black person say they don't like black people. So maybe that's a type of racial category, but maybe not racial identity. Identity itself is so complicated, though, right? Yeah. It's like a very complicated concept to unpack.
There are actually people say I don't like black people.
I don't. That's what other. I think if I
people I believe, like Clarence Thomas is a good example. Tim, the Tim guy from South Carolina, senator. These people who they don't need to say it to show me that they don't like black people, but they don't usually say that. So if somebody's actually saying that, they're at a level of, I guess, self-awareness that maybe that's a good thing.
So in this talk about racism, I do want to ask you about 45, President Trump. I don't know if we can go there. I know you're a very conservative person, and you don't usually like to put your politics out there.
I love him.
So I don't know if you feel comfortable doing that. Natasha's asking a question real quick. You remember Natasha?
From GSU?
Yeah.
Yeah, hi.
Natasha, is what you describe a sense of community or identity?
What?
I think about the racial, feeling...
like identity issues, community?
Yeah, is it like a sense of community with the, I think, racial category? Or is it a racial identity? If I'm understanding your question correctly.
I guess I prefer the word commitments. Because community... there are many communities where you can feel utterly unwelcome. So communities have a way of... It sounds like a good word, but it's actually a very bounded, exclusionary term. Like, this community means not that, right? So I police my community, but in my community it means there's something else that can never be that, right? So I guess.
Can you break that down a little bit
Well,
more?
I think if that's the best word we have to use, then I would say yes. But I prefer the word commitments.
Natasha says she's thinking of anthropologists in the field.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's appropriate. But yeah, so personally, as a personal political word, I prefer commitments. But in terms of, do you feel aligned with the black community as a political subject, in terms of a political subject, then yes, I believe that's yes. That's what I mean. You have to feel like you want to help what are generally understood to be the conditions of that are happening to particular groups of people, in order to feel like you're part of them, right? You have to be, but you don't have to be part of them racially to have that community or that commitment. And so I guess it's more important that you be committed to help and to respect and to want to change if it needs to be changed. Some things you don't want to change, but change is not always a good thing. But my point is, you're committed to the struggles, the histories, the values, the
progress.
Yeah. And so, or if it's community is the word that best explains that for you, then you're committed to the community. But black communities, for example, can't be assumed to be a member, because then Amarosa will be one, Grandes Thomas will be a community member, and we certainly don't want those people in our community.
Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, I can't. We don't get them out. Bye, Felicia's. Bye, Clarence.
I don't know if Tara still wants me to read her question. Tara was saying, I don't know if I'm following, just because how can a white person identify with a black identity, for example, but they don't need to deal with the racism that comes with it? But then later
they do deal with it, because they're working with folks. They understand how racism is working. They're there experiencing it.
But I think she's saying,
and sometimes they're experiencing it because of their commitments. They're actually being treated they're being discriminated on because of their commitments. So, like the lawyers who were trying to fight segregation in the early 20th century,
people were murdered.
Like they were, because they knew they experienced racism. They experienced community. So they experienced prejudice. And there's also these words people use for the white people that there's So I know this is a controversial topic too. So I don't want to have this be the point of this whole conversation, because I think this is not the important thing. The important thing is not to use identity, because when I use the word identity in terms of commitments, all of a sudden everybody who is committed can have the identity, and that's too difficult a concept for. Yeah. But I guess I don't like the word identity, honestly, if truth be told, because it's a psychological term, and there's been some people found comfort in these identity development theories, and I just don't, I guess. And so I prefer other terminologies, but I'm willing to take identity because it's a good word that gives comfort and a sense of community, like Natasha was saying. Commitment's the way I talk about, so I'm perfectly happy with the word. I'll use it because it has a political purpose to use it that way. And so, yes.
So we have a question, and like you said, I don't want to get bogged down on this topic, because this is tough to understand, because we're kind of talking about complicated things that it's hard just to get it in the span of an hour or two, right?
And some of you that are in classes with me, you're way more comfortable with the speak of mine, right? And some of you might be convinced, some of you might not be convinced, but for those of you who don't know me from Clarence Thomas, say what the hell is he talking about? Why? Because you don't understand the sort of way that I set these up in class or in my writings and stuff.
I can definitely share his journal articles if you would like, scholarly books, many publications, because I think this is important too. Part of Woke Wednesdays, I'm always sharing scholarly articles about everything. And I always tell you, if you want me to email it to you, I'm more than happy to email it to you. So please,
me too.
If you would like this information, yes, Dr. Baez, he's always available. So I'll ask the last question kind of around this topic. Did you ever hear about Rachel Dolezal?
The woman who was a black
a white woman, and she turned black. She said she was black. I think that her question is getting to millennial activists saying, should a white person ever make themselves seem black just to fit in with the black crowd? And I don't know. I'm kind of skeptical of this language of should or, and then because crowd I think is also kind of like community, which polices.
Well, one thing we want to ask about her, more important than anything else, was her overall work in the world good or bad for racial equality or gender equality or whatever? So that, do we look at an overall life? Or, and by the way, I'm not as insulted by this because obviously, you know, I think there was a sense of betrayal, right? So there's a sense in which you interacting with someone thinking there's something else, and there's a violation of trust, that it's not unreal, that's not an unreal thing, and that has its own reality that needs to be addressed, and it has its own kind of injury that needs to be addressed. The question for someone like me, in terms of dealing with someone like her, is overall, was there good things that happened? Because people are complicated, more or less honest with who they are in themselves. We also I don't know her psychological state. She might. We're talking about psychology. There is some truth to the fact that some people are just like they perceive themselves as this, right? And it could be real to them. So I don't know enough, and actually really haven't. I don't like the way this has been narrated in by mainstream media, because I don't trust the motives of why they choose a story, one story over another, and so I don't. They're trying to create selling news, so I don't really know how this woman was narrated to us, whatever. So there's that. But in terms of assuming all that is true, I still want to ask. I guess she was the president of the NAACP chapter, right?
Yeah.
So there was still. Did she do?
She helped a lot of children in the community.
She do good things that ultimately we can hate this, but say, okay, there might have been in her mind a reason not to disclose this information. But if she's doing it for purposes of like selfish purposes, then I find less value in that. Unless I guess I'm less willing to forgive that. So I guess I want to ask a different question about her than I'm generally seeing in these conversations about her. Like overall, what did she do? Was it a good overall in the aggregate? Was it selfish, motivated, self-serving, whatever?
Natasha's saying, and we could dedicate a whole episode to this, but she also was reported by students and faculty for policing their blackness. So that's something I guess to be said too.
Meaning that she was saying that some people are not as
black enough, maybe,
black.
Yeah, just policing a black identity or a category.
Well, you and I have a friend and you're a professor where it's not actually, I wouldn't call it this vulgar policing of a category like maybe this other woman was doing, but there's a certain sense of like black people are supposed to be committed to things, right? And those that are not have internalized their accusation. They've internalized racism and whatever. So isn't that policing? I mean, so I guess some policings are better than others, I guess.
So Instagram kicks us off after 1 hour. Can you believe it's in an hour already?
Oh, really?
Yeah, see?
Wow,
Wednesdays.
I thought it was 2.
Wednesday's magic. Wednesday's magic.
I thought it was 2 hours.
So if you can hang out with us for like a couple more minutes, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So I have to end it and then restart it. Yeah, because Instagram kicks us off.
Oh.
So yeah.
Well, what do they want?
So I'm gonna end it and then I'll restart it. Don't worry.
Oh.
It works. Yeah.
Yeah, like the last time?
No. Okay. You don't have to. Okay.